Once we lift the leg in a single leg balance, the pelvis automatically moves. When we move the femur, the thigh bone, it will affect the pelvis. When we're doing something like tree pose or a single leg balance, it's going to affect the pelvis, and we want to understand how to align the pelvis so that we can stay balanced. My name is Christina Raskin. I'm the founder of Soul Thrive Yoga, and at Soul Thrive, we really want to help you to explore all the different avenues of yoga. Use it for physical health, but also mental and emotional health as well. Today, I'm going to talk about tree pose in particular and how lifting the leg, moving the femur, is going to affect the pelvis. As a very general rule, when we're talking about the pelvis in neutral, we want to think of the hip bones like headlights. They point straight forward. One is not higher than the other. They're not rotated. They're also not pointing down or up. Now, of course, the pelvis does move in all of those ways, and that's healthy and wonderful. It's not necessarily a bad thing if the pelvis is rotated. Also, once you move the thigh bone, it is going to affect the pelvis, and depending on your skeleton, your musculature, where you're tight, where you're strong, it will move the pelvis, and that's not always a bad thing. So we don't need to be militant about this. The reason we talk about it, though, is because if the pelvis shifts too far one way or the other, then you can twist the knee a little bit. You could also fall over. And so since we're trying to balance on that one foot, it can be helpful to understand what the pelvis is doing. So in a tree pose, we're of course standing on the one foot. When we move the femur forward and then turn it out to the side, that's going to affect the pelvis here. As a general rule, we want to keep those headlights pointing forward, all three directions, like we talked about. A couple ways that it tends to go out of alignment is once I open the knee, I turn out, the pelvis starts to rotate. And what can happen here, since my foot is anchored onto the floor, it can't move because it's on that sticky mat. When I rotate the hips, this knee starts to buckle. And this can be very painful for that knee. It can affect the knee a little bit. So we try to keep the pelvis straight forward. But since we're bringing that out, a lot of times, students think I have to bring it all the way out to the side. That's not what's happening. It's going out about 45 degrees or so. Again, it will depend on your skeleton. But the leg is going out to a certain amount without rotating the pelvis. So as you keep the hips forward, open the knee out to the side. There's this kind of countering happening in the body where the knee is going out towards the side and the opposite hip is actually pulling back to try to keep the hip squared so that we don't buckle into that knee. So that's the rotation plane here, this direction. Now the other way that the pelvis moves is this direction. The headlight's pointing down or up. What tends to happen when we lift the one leg and we take it out to the side is we start to pop the bum back, the tailbone back, the headlights start to point down. So to counter this, we're going to draw the headlights or your hip bones up to the ribs, draw the tailbone down. Another way to think of it, draw the pubic bone towards the belly button, tailbone down. So keep that activated as you take the leg out to the side. And then the last way that the pelvis moves is this direction, or one hip higher than the other. And this is one of the main ones that will knock us over if we're in a single leg balance like tree pose. When we lift that opposite foot, what tends to happen is we start to sink. We either sink this direction and then we'll fall that direction, or sometimes we lift this hip up, especially if we're bringing the leg a little bit higher. So we want to think about the hip bones level straight across, and that's going to help us to balance. This is going to use our glute medius, our muscle on the outer hip here. That's going to have to activate in order to not sink to the side. So you can think about pulling that supporting hip in towards your midline to help balance. So being aware of the hip bones and how they point in all three directions will help you to stay balanced whenever you're standing on a single leg in any version of a single leg balance.